This is Matthew Cratter from Bitcoin University, and today I wanted to talk about Janet Yellen as a fiat idiot. The background for this is that there's absolutely nothing elite about our elites anymore. Even though they've attended elite institutions, we can see, especially by looking at Janet Yellen's CV, how incompetent many of these people are who are now in power and who remain in power in spite of their many wrong decisions and wrong predictions. If we take a look at Janet Yellen's Wikipedia article, we can see that she's had a long and illustrious career as a fiat grifter, living off of universities and think tanks, being the chair of the Federal Reserve, now being the U.S. Treasury Secretary, basically bouncing from one cushy corner office to another. In spite of her abysmal track record, I think she's more of just a useful idiot to the regime, sort of like Paul Krugman or someone like that. But we can see her track record. Back in June of 2017, Yellen, back when she was chair of the Fed, said that she expected no new financial crisis in our lifetimes, which is a very foolish thing to say because we have a new financial crisis every 3, 5, 10 years, something like this. And so she made this prediction in 2017, and just 2 years later, less than 2 years later, we had the repo crisis, and the Fed had to inject $75 billion of emergency liquidity. And then, of course, we had all of the pandemic market dysfunctions in 2020. Possible explanations for Yellen's failed prediction. Number one, she was expecting most humans to die really soon. So saying no new financial crisis in our lifetimes, maybe she was expecting her own lifetime to be cut short, or other human beings. Or maybe it was just that Janet Yellen was making so much money from speaking fees that she didn't want to rock the boat. She made over $7 million from speaking to bankers at Goldman Sachs, Barclays, and similar places, which shows a huge conflict of interest. You have all these revolving doors between the regulators and the government officials and the banks. If you're enjoying this video so far, I just ask you to please subscribe, like, comment, and share. There's another possible explanation, though, for Janet's failed financial prediction, and that would be that Janet Yellen is just an incompetent moron. And the longer I live, the more I think that this is true. Just a couple weeks ago, she said that she was feeling very good about a soft landing for the U.S. economy. This is probably the strongest argument that you can make that we're actually going to have a severe financial crisis, because she's usually 180 degrees wrong. She said this right before bonds really went off a cliff a couple weeks ago, and now they're hitting new lows today. Janet Yellen also said over the weekend that we can afford two wars at the same time, offering military support to both Israel and Ukraine. Unfortunately, she probably hasn't checked out the U.S. debt clock fairly recently. The largest budget items in the U.S. fiscal budget are Medicare, Social Security, both of which are going to skyrocket as more and more people retire. We have the interest on the debt, which is approaching $1 trillion. And then, of course, we have the defense budget. Even without a lot of the support, it's at $800 billion. This is clearly something that we cannot afford, especially when we're adding trillions of dollars to the U.S. debt because of these fiscal deficits every year. If Janet Yellen didn't bother to take a look at skyrocketing interest payments approaching $1 trillion, as I said, she may not have been quite as sanguine about the U.S. being able to afford all of these proxy wars. But the really appalling thing happened a couple days ago, thanks to Stack Hodler for documenting this. There's a video you can watch below. In this video, at about the 2-minute mark, she says, I don't know where that 122% number comes from. The U.S. federal debt to GDP ratio is about 98% now. This is absolutely appalling. I can tell Janet where it comes from. It actually comes from the Fed's own website. We can see here that public debt to GDP is 119%, almost 120%. It is not anywhere close to 98%. So here's a Treasury Secretary who has no idea what the public debt is as a percentage of GDP. Why does any of this matter? It matters because our leaders cannot make good decisions if they're not even in command of the basic facts, basic economic facts. If Yellen doesn't realize that debt to GDP is at extremely dangerous levels, that's absolutely terrifying. It's also terrifying because Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve today, also seems unaware that it's impossible to do the Paul Volcker playbook of raising rates sharply to crush inflation with debt to GDP so high. Paul Volcker, of course, being famous for raising rates in the late 70s and early 80s to try to break the back of inflation. But if we take a look at that chart of debt to GDP, which Janet Yellen seems so blissfully unaware of, back when Volcker was doing that, debt to GDP was much lower. It was closer to 31%. percent, and you can raise rates very sharply in that kind of environment. But when you have a highly levered economy where not just the corporate sector and the private sector, but also the government is highly levered, if you raise rates sharply, you end up blowing things up, just like Powell blew up the U.S. banking system earlier this year in March and had to roll out the BTFP in order to bail out the banks. Listening to Janet Yellen's comments, in which she doesn't even know what the debt to GDP levels are, it's really a reminder that in current politics and finance and economics, there are no adults in the room. We have a catatonic president, we have a Congress that is geriatric, and we have people like Janet Yellen who don't even know basic economic numbers. And so if you're still sitting with the majority of your wealth stored in the fiat financial system, in U.S. banks, in U.S. brokerage accounts, I would just say good luck to you. Personally, I prefer Bitcoin. Bitcoin really is the best hedge against the kind of fiat stupidity and lack of eliteness that we see displayed by Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.